Welcome to the Thinking Practitioner Podcast,
a podcast where we dig into the fascinating issues, conditions, and quandaries in the massage and manual therapy world today.
I'm Whitney Lowe.
And I'm Till Luca.
Welcome to the Thinking Practitioner.
And welcome to the Thinking Practitioner, where Books of Discovery has been a part of the massage therapy and bodywork world for over 25 years. Nearly 3,000 schools around the globe teach with their textbooks, e-textbooks, and digital resources. Books of Discovery likes to say that learning adventures start here, and they find that same spirit here on the Thinking Practitioner podcast and are proud to support our work, knowing that we share the mission to bring the massage and bodywork community thought-provoking and enlivening content that advances our profession.
Instructors of manual therapy education programs can request complimentary copies of Books of Discovery's textbook to review for use in their programs. Please reach out at booksofdiscovery.com. Listeners can explore their collection of learning resources for anatomy, pathology, kinesiology, physiology, ethics, and business mastery at booksofdiscovery.com, where you, as a listener, can save 15% by entering thinking at checkout. Nice to be here with you, Whitney. Nice to be here with you, Ronna Moore. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, indeed.
Well, thank you too to Teal and Whitney. It's enormously, it feels like a bit of a privilege speaking to you, because I've listened to you both for a long time, and TPP is up there in my top 5 podcasts I listen to. So it's lovely to be able to contribute. Yeah.
That's a compliment.
Right. Yes, indeed. Yeah.
You heard one of our episodes, Whitney talking to me about the passing of my wife and the process I was going through around that a few months ago. And you shared some of your perspective and some of your work. Can you tell the listeners about yourself and about what we're talking about today?
Yes, that's right, Till and Whitney. I heard that podcast, and as I said in my response to you, I found it very touching, but also it was a kind of an invitation, I suppose, because I do work in the field of grief, loss and grief, and so I suppose I took a risk a little bit in sharing with you some work that I have done with a colleague of mine, Dr. Sarah Fogarty, around massage therapy in the context of loss and grief. And Sarah comes to loss and grief from a different perspective than me. She works primarily with pregnancy and childbirth. But my work as a massage therapist over 40 years has led me towards, particularly in the last decade or so, working in the field of oncology and palliative care. And working in palliative care, you inevitably encounter loss, grief, death, bereavement. And about 5 years ago, I decided to reconnect with academia, if you like, and went back to university and undertook some postgraduate coursework in palliative care. And I'm midway through a doctorate in public health, investigating massage therapy in the context of palliative care. So
tell our listeners what palliative care is and where you're doing this.
Okay, so palliative care is an approach to care, and it has a fairly recent history, I suppose. It really came to life, so to speak, in the 1960s from the UK. Dame Cicely Saunders was perhaps one of the progenitors or founders of the concept of palliative care. And there are lots of other people as well. There's Balfour Mount in Canada, even George Engel's work with the biopsychosocial concept around just that as a model of care. So palliative care comes from the word palliare, and palliare means to wrap or embrace. And I think that's rather nice notion to keep in mind, because it really is around wrapping around a person who has received a potentially life-limiting diagnosis. And the concept is to provide symptom management, but also to take into account all the other aspects of a person's life. psychological, emotional, spiritual, social. And within a multidisciplinary team, work to bring together as many resources as possible to support a person who is living with an illness with the potential that that illness will cause their death. Palliative care in Australia is somewhat different. I think there's a few iterations to palliative care in the Western world. The most recent model of palliative care is to introduce palliative care as soon as possible after a person has received such a diagnosis. And whilst it may be that palliative care might be in the background, it's nevertheless there, ready, if you like, to step forward when curative treatment starts to be withdrawn, if you like. But palliative care can be provided whilst curative treatment is still in place in Australia. I think it's a little bit different in the United States. My understanding with doing some work with Cindy Spence over a couple of years ago, I understand that once a person in the United States has entered a hospice, one of the conditions of that is that they no longer receive curative treatment. I'm not sure, is that correct? You might have
in terms of the insurance coverage, that's correct, yes.
Yes, that's it. I think that's what I meant more around the financial aspect. And unfortunately, healthcare is tightly bound to the financial resources to support it. But in general terms, palliative care is, it embraces the concept of total pain, and it neither seeks to hasten nor prolong death. The interesting features of it are that it is multidisciplinary almost by definition, because one would not expect that any one clinician could be able to support a person across that whole broad spectrum of issues and needs. And the other element of it is, which folds into the relevance for us on the topic today that we're talking about today, is that the unit of care in palliative care is the person with the illness, but also their informal caregivers. And this is usually, not always, but usually a family member, could be a spouse, a child, a parent, a best friend. And so the attention is provided to that person. How is that person coping, managing? What support can be given to that person in order for them to help the person who is living with the illness?
That was, if I could just jump in with some of my own experience there, yeah. That was, there was a stark watershed moment in my process with my wife. And unfortunately, it is either you're getting curative treatment, in her case, chemotherapy, radiation, etc., or you're in palliative care, which is about symptom management and quality of life, perhaps, and comfort, those kinds of things. And a lot of people's minds, it's about end of life and dying.
Yes.
And so it's the either or moment was a big one for us.
I'm sure that must have been a really hard transition traverse. And Teal, can I just say, I really appreciate your curiosity and your courage, if you like, to enter this topic from a sort of, in somewhat an abstract way, in order to serve other body workers and therapists, really. Mm-hmm. And I really deeply appreciate that. But I also would like to really say to you that from my point of view, being the age I am and being on this planet, I have experienced significant losses, but they are mostly distal. They are not proximate. And I'm not making an assumption that for Whitney it might be similar, but for you it isn't. So if there is things that we talk about that you find perhaps a little bit too uncomfortable, please take care of yourself and do whatever you need to do for that. I'm sure Whitney and I can power on in some form or another if you need to step back for a moment. But I just want to really say that. But
thank you for that. Sorry. Thank you for that permission, but also for the acknowledgement, reflection. I appreciate that. And it's honestly, I have a lot of energy for this topic now. How do we all as humans deal with loss and grief, and then bridging it into the work I do with Whitney? How do we bring those questions, gifts back to the profession and how all of us as practitioners will deal with that with ourselves, but also we walk in our door all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah, you two are educators. I'm not an educator. I just I have intellectual curiosity, but I'm also a human being and a therapist. So we are all invested in what we're talking about. Yeah. So just to
I want to go back for a minute too and underline what you said about the unit of care in the palliative approach being the patient and the support system. Because it was, and again, the stark difference we ran into was it was really hard to get information or even help thinking through quality of life questions around the treatments. There were many treatments that were offered, and the oncologists and radiologists and everybody were really good at what they did and had them lined up, for us. As one stopped working, the next one was ready. But the question of at what point are the side effects or the suffering that came along with those treatments greater than the benefit was not one they were willing to go into. And they were quite clear about that. I respected our oncologist who said, no, I cure tumors. And those questions about when is it worth it or what's, those aren't my specialty. I'm going to refer you to support services for that.
Yeah.
But that was a clear demarcation. And so to engage when it finally was the moment where Loretta says, okay, palliative care, that's the next thing. She decided to stop treatment. That's when it was for her.
Yes, it's really unfortunate that we do have these tendencies, don't we, in so many ways to create silos and clear demarcations. And I can understand that because one can't really expect I think the bottom line is that we would want our clinicians and want of us all to be human enough to recognize that nothing is as simple as just this one thing. It all flows over into other elements of our life. And certainly with treatments, I didn't respond really well enough to say where I work. So I actually work in a cancer setting. So it speaks to me what you're saying, Till. I work in a hospital in a cancer setting, and I also, in the past, I've worked in hospice and in community-based specialist palliative care. So I think there is a shift. It's small, but it's there, that there is more consideration around the whole person. Just about every health service I know has a mission statement saying person-centered care, but that hasn't really, I think, well translated yet.
What's interesting is I see it almost as a paradigm divide. As a medical practitioner, you're about curing things. You're about fixing if you'll have it or getting rid of the symptoms. And then at some point when that's no longer possible or the costs of doing it are too great, there's another perspective that comes in. I think that's what we're here to talk about. And what's interesting, as body workers or massage therapists, we often work with people through that whole process. And so the questions for my wife and me were up, certainly, how do I live well for her? How do I live well as I can, given the treatments I'm going through? For myself, how do I get the support or care I need? Those are certainly there before we formally entered palliative care.
I'm curious too about, you speak a lot about, the sort of systems process of getting other people that are in association with the person that you're in primary care with, you sort of having communications with them, bringing them on to be a part of this process. And in sort of the massage therapy world, where we are, so much of what we're doing is really just that one-on-one in the one treatment room with that person without talking with other family members, let's say, or something like that. But we know those things are really important in terms of, how is a person's getting support at home. I'm just curious, do you have any suggestions or input about how do we make a better connection with that individual and their bigger ecosystem of the things that they're grappling with outside of our interactions with them?
Yes, it's difficult. I've been blessed because I have actually been embedded in multidisciplinary teams all the time that I've worked in PAL care. So I am, if you like, a work is surrounded by people who are all invested in working together in collaboration. And there's no doubt that is the exemplar of support, not only for people with life-limiting illnesses, but for any illness or any injury, that wraparound approach. So I think massage therapists, because we are slightly on the edge of, we kind of traverse that health professional, personal care service domain. And as long as I've been a therapist, this has been the case. Lately, I think there has been a shift to integrate massage therapy more into a health professional way of thinking. I know the work at HealWell, for example, and I know you've spoken to Cal and in the past, and they are working extremely well with advocacy around ushering massage therapy into the settings that we can contribute in a team way. For therapists, I don't know what it's like in the United States, but most therapists in Australia have solo practices. They're out there working in the community, possibly doing mobile services, but certainly in home clinics. That's the predominant model. It's not the only model, but for those therapists, if they have someone they've worked with for a long time, and this is the kind of thing that might happen, is that the person is diagnosed with a serious illness. They may support that person, whatever that looks like, in the early stages of the illness, and they may be with that person all the way until the disease starts to progress, and then they become seriously unwell, and the therapist may still be there, but they might be isolated. And I think the only way to overcome that is to get a little bit bold and start making connections ourselves, because it's unlikely, from my experience, health professionals, I think we all tend to be a little bit defensive around our field. I'd like it to stop, but it's there. But I think we need to advocate for ourselves, and we can, as long as we have clarity around what we are doing with our patient or client, what we can offer, we have to have clarity around that and be able to articulate that in a way which can be received and understood by the health professionals we're aiming to connect with, and reach out to them. And I think we ought to get into the habit, if you like, of cultivating options for referral in our practice, even if we're working in a solely MSK field, multiple skeletal framework with injury rather than illness. Even then, I think we ought to, as therapists, try to establish relationships with other health professionals as a matter of course. Be a little bit pushy, sending letters, explaining what we do, and just to set up those lines of communication, because it can be an isolating experience working on your own. And I don't think it's particularly the best way to work for our clients. I think, there's much to be gained by deepening communication with other health professionals involved. And just about everyone we see will have a suite of health professionals in their lives, whether it's a dentist or a podiatrist or a physiotherapist, whatever it is. I know in my own life, I seem to have a whole panel of people taking care of me in some form or another. And whilst none of that is intense or critical at the moment, it may be in the future. And if we've already established the connections, that'll make it so much easier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Well, let's take a step back for a moment, and maybe this question belonged up front, and that's, how is grief and loss even relevant to the practice of massage therapy? I mean, certainly when someone comes in and says, I'm going into palliative care, or my partner, son, relatives going to palliative care, that's a clear sign. But is there a bigger application that we should keep in mind as we think about this, about how grief is relevant to massage work?
Well, I think, yes, the answer is yes, there is, Till, because I think it's the human experience. Loss is with us in every aspect of our lives, really. So we are accumulating or experiencing losses all the time. whether it's lost keys. That may seem insignificant, but the physiological response is really at base the same as for really significant losses. So I think when we think about people coming into our space for some support, therapeutic support as a massage therapist, to keep in mind that it is possible this person has sustained a lot of losses through their life. They may have sustained really significant losses. They may not share those with you. They may have come to you for that reason, but it's more likely that they will remain hidden. One of the paradoxes, if you like, of being a massage therapist or body worker is that if we focus on establishing, cultivating a really good therapeutic alliance or relationship, then we invite sharing. So it's quite possible that even though the person has come to us without any intention whatsoever to share the fact that they have recently lost their mother or, lost their job or whatever it might be, a significant loss, it may emerge. So I think we need to be, as health professionals, I consider myself a health professional. I do work in health settings, so I feel comfortable to do so, that our main goal is, as we know, is not to cause harm. But I think keeping in mind that all humans have the potential to be carrying losses, and being attentive to that and alert to that without necessarily focusing on it, without even really probing. And I don't think that is what we're going to be doing, but allowing the potential, allowing the possibility that significant loss might arise. Mm. And I think that is an absolutely key element of being a therapist. It's similar to trauma. I think we need to assume that I never like assuming anything really, but I think we need to have in our mind that people can come into our space carrying a lot, and just be attentive and be prepared. I'm not sure whether
I think I would go for your use of the word assume, because dealing with my own process, it makes me notice how universal many of these principles are to all kinds of loss.
Yeah. And
that I, as practitioner in the field for 40 years, had been dealing with loss and grief the whole time as a practitioner with my clients without it out being spoken. Could be the inherent loss of aging, loss of ability, loss of possibility, loss of options and future dreams. But I think people are bringing those to us all the time. And like you said, not necessarily naming them or speaking them or labeling them, but there's something about what we do that helps.
Yes.
The potential to help.
What is that? That's interesting, isn't it? But I think you're quite right, Till. There was something that it's just slipped out of my mind then, but I can always find something else that's floating around in my mind. I think there is something fundamentally distinct about what we do as body therapists.
What is it distinct, and how does it help what we do?
Yeah, well, I think it's to do with sort of the most obvious thing, I suppose, is that we touch people. And to touch people, it automatically has a sort of a double meaning in a way, if you like, because when we say, like I said before, Till, your podcast touched me. So, touch is such a powerful phenomenon for human beings. It's one, obviously, it's one of our major senses. And it's, I don't know that, I think it was very interesting during the pandemic, the response we had quite a lot of lockdowns here, and there was a very big focus on separation and loss of touch, or not being able to touch, not being able to hug people, not being able to be in contact with people. It was quite interesting, really, because it brought a focus to touch, which I think touch in a way has been sort of the poor cousin of the other senses. Not always, not always appreciated. So we are in a position that there are few other people do. Hairdressers certainly touch people from the shoulders up.
And hear about problems all the time from there.
Correct, that's right. Right. Similar way, because they're creating this little bubble of, communication, which is private or relatively private, depends on how busy a salon is, can be a very interesting place to be sometimes to hear other people's conversations. But generally speaking, that's right. Psychologists, only a small band of psychologists are able to touch their clients. Somatic psychotherapists, people who do Hakomi, for example, these invite touch. Even people, I see people, my cancer clients, patients that I work with will often say, but they didn't even look at me. They didn't even touch me. So they've gone to see their physician, and the physician's got the panel up there with all the bloods and scan results, etc. So they're interpreting those scans to give information about the person that's right in front of them, and not making contact with that person. There's a lovely TED talk by, I think his name's Abraham Verghese. I think I've got it right. That's in the echoes somewhere back in my head. He did a lovely TED talk about this very thing, about the withdrawal of touch in ordinary life. And what we do is there's two things about what we do. We touch people, but it is also welcome touch. It is touch to which people have automatically consented. The patients that I see have had lots of things done to their bodies that required touch, instrumental touch, if you like. And it can, as Till may be well aware, a lot of that is brutal. And it means people have to brace themselves against that touch. I don't do deep tissue work very much anymore. Occasionally I do, if it's might be beneficial. But the touch that I try to offer to people I work with is without resistance. It is designed to be a connection of comfort and pleasantness. The definition of pain, the new definition says unpleasant or pleasant. Really, it just boils down to that. So what I'm invested in is in pleasant touch, because the pleasant touch is where we can talk to the nervous system. And that's, in my mind, that's what I'm doing. I'm doing my absolute best to talk to that person's nervous system. And massage therapists...
And to say comforting things with your hands.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's all about it's about, in the context of grief and loss, I think what we're hoping to do is help a person, there's grief and then there's grieving, if you like, where the goal is really not to fix anything. We're not going to make people better, if you like, but we may cushion them while, help to cushion people while the grieving is happening. And I think that's the best we can ask for. And it's not much, but on the other hand, it's a lot. So
yeah, that is a lot. I mean, you talked about this kind of inherent defensiveness we might have as a profession. And I think it's often around this question. Are we making things better, or are we just, in quotes, making people feel better? As if making people feel better isn't as valuable as some change in some other dimension, which it's easy to fall into that in this situation. Because we're not going to rub the grief muscle and then the grief will be over.
Right. Yeah.
No, that's right. It reminds
but what's missing, I mean, what is missing in my case is touch, literally, companionship, witnessed and tracked, paid attention to. Yep. All those things happen in this context we did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear also about your take on this, because this is one of the things that frequently I grapple with this question, trying to find an answer to it, because so much of, I think, what makes an individual so valuable in a healthcare team working with somebody is oftentimes that degree of compassion, that degree of empathy that they can exude toward the other person's experience. And so much of that skill really comes with life experiences for so many people. And we have an increasingly large number of people entering our profession now at 19 years old and 20 years old with very little life experience. And a person often comes in for massage and maybe doesn't know that they're going to have a really impactful experience like this because they haven't been touched this way before. And I think a lot of times these people are a lot less prepared for how to grapple with some of those things. So I'm just wondering if you have any insights or suggestions about the kinds of things that we might be able to do to help better prepare some of the people who are coming into this work for some of the things that they might encounter.
Yes, Whitney, it is difficult, isn't it? Because I think we are all, as massage therapists, we're mad on techniques. We want to know how to do stuff to people. But I think that certainly the longer I've been doing this work, the more I realize that, yes, the techniques, of course, we need those techniques, but it's less about that than who we are as a person. And somebody coming straight out of school to become a massage therapist, they don't have life experience. That's right. They haven't been through a roller coaster of loss and recovery and life coming and life treating us badly, if you like, and moving forward. They haven't had those experiences. But I do think that there is a role for teaching. There are some teaching things that can be done. I've done a lot of work, if you like. When I say done, I've a lot of professional development around this very topic. Compassion cultivation training is one. Stanford has a really great program in CCT. Mindful self-compassion teaching. I am actually a mindful self-compassion teacher. I think having an understanding of empathy and what all the iterations, how empathy can show up, communication styles, these can be taught. And I think there can be some investment in those elements of being a person who can bring their whole self to the work and feel safe and comfortable to be there. Because I think we, of course, carry our griefs and losses with us, and even a person coming out of school will. So how do we fold those in to being a person who can be just be with suffering? Yes, I think people who've been around a while may have some advantages, but not
maybe. I mean, I'm making faces here because just in my recent experience, there was such a range of responses, and it was really clear to see, and not to see necessarily, but to sense who had dealt with loss on their own. And just to stick up for 19-years for a minute.
Yeah.
It wasn't related to the years of life.
Yeah.
At
I think
all.
that's right.
And like you said, it's who we are as people.
Yeah.
And in that context, let's say someone just out of school dealing with someone who's bereaved and open about that, they're getting life experience right there. And I would want them to be able to have a conversation with someone like you, Ronna, someone like you, Whitney, about, gosh, what would I say? What should I say? What would go on? What would help right there? To grapple with those questions is often how we get experience at any age.
I think that's right. And Whitney, I'm really, because your last podcast I listened to you on ABMP was around education and new models of assessment and competency. I'm not describing this well enough, but it occurred to me at the time, I thought, now how in this way of changing how we educate therapists, how can we fold in these elements we've been talking about? Because there's problems around that, because I don't know that we have skilled teachers in the area. I know Healwell are doing fabulous work in that space. They spend a lot of energy, well-informed energy, on directing our attention to the importance of presence, communication, the whole suite of things that enable us to be the therapists that we want to be. So it's a challenge to you, Whitney, really, because Yes, we have to, it's really important, but it is not paid attention to enough. I did the weirdest thing with, which was really a learning experience, or was meant to be when it turned out to be. When I was doing a postgrad in Palliative, we had a whole series of lectures on communication, therapeutic communication. And there is quite a lot of literature out there around therapeutic communication. But what we did as an activity is we had actors come in and they played roles, if you like, and we went over and over again, different kinds of conversations. And the first one that I had with professional actors are amazing. And the first one said, well, when I was approaching her to say I was coming to give her a massage, she was a patient. And she said, well, why would I want a massage? You know, you're not going to fix me. You're not going to help me. Like this whole barrage that's just completely invalidating, you know, what I was trying to bring. But these are real conversations that people can have. They might not come out of their mouths, but they might be thinking them. And,
yes,
you know, how do we respond? So I think there is benefit in education around these issues because you can get better at it. There's no doubt that we bring our personality, our temperament, our life experiences, we bring all those with us, but there are ways that we can actually develop mastery in therapeutic communication, in therapeutic alliance cultivation.
Mm-hmm.
We can learn this.
Can we get specific? Like, do you want to name any things you'd love to see therapists either doing or not doing in those contexts when there might be grief in the room?
Oh, well, it's really hard, Teal, because I think what we learn in the literature around loss and grief is that whilst it's a universal experience, it is completely individual. It's like your own fingerprint, the way you grieve. And there was a really interesting, I can't remember which website. It is an American website, which I think is quite a useful resource. But they did this kind of mini little survey where they asked people to send in the things that people said to them when they had lost someone in their life, someone significant.
Yeah.
What did people say to you that was helpful, and what did people say to you that was unhelpful? Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing was when they got, and it was quite a lot, like it was in the thousands, I think, responses, that sometimes they appeared on both sides. Mm-hmm. So for some people, that was a helpful thing to say, and for some people, that wasn't a helpful thing to say. So I think this is where delicacy or sensitivity is really important. We need to follow the lead of the person in front of us. We need to be open to whatever arises. We need to be totally there and totally present. But as for things, look, I think there is one thing, and I have done this myself, actually, I'm ashamed to say, not that long ago, I came out with a phrase which I think is very rarely going to be helpful. And that is to say to somebody, at least. Mm-hmm. So someone has lost somebody. And you say, at least, and it could be at least you have 5 other children or whatever, if they've lost their 6th child. Yeah. I mean, I can't imagine, I don't think there is any circumstance in which that is an okay thing to say. It's just completely unhelpful. I did do that. And I know why I did, because I was rushing. I was running late on the ward, and I wasn't in myself. You know, I hadn't really prepared myself. I had really, I was discombobulated. I was dysregulated. Mm-hmm. So I understand it. It was unforgivable, although I have to myself.
Here's the paradox. We've said that what we offer is comfort, is making things feel better. And yet in our interactions, when we want to make something feel better by saying something, it's almost guaranteed to be the opposite effect. That the most helpful thing, and I've done my own personal study around this. I mentioned, I think with you, Whitney, taking this stack of sympathy cards and going through them and analyzing them to myself and saying, what did this person, how helpful was this and why? And you're absolutely right. There's not a magic formula. There's not a protocol. There's not a technique. But it was something about being willing to be in the pain with me.
Yeah.
And not even offering something to try to make it better, because inadvertently what happens then is the message can come through like it's basically not quite okay how you're feeling now, and I hope it gets better for you. Sorry for you that you're suffering.
Yeah.
Instead of, this is tough.
Yeah, and you had alluded to this before earlier, Ron. I'm just curious in terms of what Till was saying too. There is just such a mindset that so many of us walk into the treatment room with, that we're supposed to fix something, and when something comes up or happens like that, there is a tendency to think that we need to do something to fix it.
Yeah.
And like, any ideas, like how do we get people to kind of get out of that mold and be somewhere different?
It's very hard, because I think people move into this kind of work as a therapist, if you like, even putting the word therapist next to us, we're automatically set up to think we're going to be solving problems. And it's really hard to wind that back. And I think we need to shut up, when we're talking, when we're with people, because mind you, there's been a couple of interesting research projects which show that in that interaction, when people come into a therapeutic relationship, could be physiotherapist, could be massage therapist, there is an expectation of competence. So you have to find a way to be competent, but in such a way as we're not, I think we really do have to spend a lot of effort saying that all we're doing is facilitating change. Even if we're doing that, I'm really talking more now, not so much about grief and loss, but with injuries. I think we're facilitating change in that situation, but we're not fixing things. And I just think we've got to stop thinking we're fixing things.
Even change implies that something's not okay.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Maybe what would it be like? What would it be like to say we are highly trained, sensitive companions?
Yes.
In a multi-sensorial, multi-dimensional way.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Till. Yeah, I did this beautiful course called Companioning the Dying, and the amicus is a word for companioning, and to be an amicus, which is really to be beside someone. We have skills, we've got resources, I'm offering them to you, and that's all.
Mm-hmm.
It's really as simple as that. It's just that the mindset for our work more broadly is not really like that. It's not set up like that. We're meant to have a result. Even the way billing happens,
At least in our own minds, and we assume our clients might want that too. But so often what happens when we really let go of that and connect, we both walk away richer, fuller, even more satisfied.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah.
I want a listener to send us their business card that says something like nonverbal grief companion. Or something
certified.
Like that.
Yeah. Certified.
Yes, that's a good idea. I might do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
I remember years ago hearing, I think this was a taped talk that Ram Dass had done, talking about people who were coming to him asking about, how do I get trained to do what you do? And he said, you don't get trained to be like a professional. He was working with people who were dying, I think, in palliative care. So you don't get certified as a dyer, as a dire person or something like that. That's just not, that's not how it works.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Life is our certification. Our heart is our certification.
I think that's right. Being human, and recognizing that all humans suffer. It's it is our nature to get old. It is of our nature. There's the 5 remembrances, the Buddhist ones. I can never get the wording right. But it's it is of our nature to become sick, to be old, and to die, and to lose people. This is life. And I think there's a lot of expressions these days that we're a death-defying culture. I'm not quite sure United States and Australia are similar in some ways, but not all. I think there are cultural differences to the way groups respond to dying. And I think that's a really interesting thing. I mean, obviously, people have been living and dying on this planet for quite a long time. It's not something new, but I do think that there is a tendency in maybe, I'm not sure whether it's just the Western world, but I think we are inclined to be so focused on wellness and so focused on positivity, and they're valuable, but they're not all of life. It's life is not like that.
That's right.
So, I don't know what else to say on that, but it's just
and then we take as a practitioner, it's easy for us to fall into the role of the optimist or the hope holder, the one who is offering some sort of tether back to a hopeful position. But who wants to hang out with a cheerleader when you're feeling really bad?
Yeah.
Like, it's easy for us to fall into that role of that side of the paradox, and not remember that sometimes it's just the whole picture. That's all we can offer.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other questions that we offered that you want to make sure we have time to talk about, Ronna?
Well, I guess I didn't really talk about models of grief very much. And also I think it's interesting that massage therapy is around the body. We did talk about that a little bit. And I think, what can we do with a person? What can we do with our hands? What can we do with our session with someone? I think it is more about being than doing, but there are some doing things as well. And I think I spent a lot of effort. And remember, I'm not an educator, so I'm talking entirely from my own experience and what I do. I spend quite a lot of effort making sure the environment in which a person comes is calm and steady, and that myself, apart from the example I gave you before, that I am calm and steady. And there's lots of elements to that. It's about temperature, it's about the way I use my voice, it's the way I might talk or not talk, the movements I make around the room. Everything needs to. What happens when people have suffered a significant loss is that their brain is disorganized, because, as we've come to know in neuroscience, our brains work on prediction, predicting what's going to happen the next moment, and being able to move through the world on the basis of prediction, which arises from what we've experienced in the past. So when a person, particularly have lost someone in your life, like Till had, someone who's living in the house with you, there is so much sensory input that you receive from that person. Just the sound of them moving around the house, the smell they make as they come out of the showers and wafting over you, the touch, or all that whole sensory information is gone. And the brain is struggling to figure out, what's going on. So it's deeply unsettling. And I think what we can do is create some predictability in what we do. It might be a simple thing, but I think just to anchor, to help to anchor ourselves and to enable a person to feel safe and anchored. There's a concept called querencia, which is where, if you've heard of that, it's a Spanish term. It's a Spanish term for when a bull in a bullfight finds a spot in the ring, which I'm not really, I don't like bullfighting, but the bull finds a spot to go to where it feels most protected and safe. It'll find a spot in that arena. It's the querencia. And I often think of that I would like to cultivate that space for people that come into my space, a space where they can feel protected, because the world, their world is not, it's not particularly safe, or it's uncertain. The ground is shifting. So for here, right now, with me, all the movements I make are to actually stabilize you in coherencia. And I think we can all do that as massage therapists. We can all do that. The other thing I really had wanted to talk about, which is are all the grief models out there, but I think they can be really helpful. So if people are interested at the abstract models, these are all the, academics that come up with explanations as to what's happening with people whilst they're grieving. I think, Till, you might have sent me the one about myths, and there is one that I want to address because it's such a sticky concept, and that is the 5 stages of grief. And I know you spoke about that in your podcast. Should I keep talking, or do you want me to stop?
Yeah, tell us something about that.
So I think this is really, people have that 5 stages of grief. I keep hearing it all the time. It is such a sticky concept. But what's happened since Elizabeth Kubler-Ross came up with that framework, and that framework was originally conceptualized for people who are dying, and morphed into people who have lost someone who is dying. And there are all sorts of subcategories under each one of those 5 stages. And there was an additional one, which was hope. But the thing is, it gave the impression that there was a linear progression. I know you spoke about this in your podcast, that it is not a linear process. It is actually all over the place process, and it will find a way forward. But there's so many other elements to it than just the 5 stages of grief. A couple of the really lovely models that have emerged in the last 3 or 4 decades, I suppose, are the dual process model and the growing around grief model. There's several others, but they're the ones that I, if you like, turn to, because that's one of the other things that a massage therapist can do if they have some awareness and maybe some professional development around grief, is they can do some gentle education around this. Just an explanation, a simple drawing, which I do sometimes for growing around grief. And that one is developed by Tonkin, and it really just says that grief, you draw a circle, it's a black circle. And it actually, in the early days of one's experience of grief, you've lost someone, and grief just takes over your whole life. It's right here. It's big. So even drawing that circle. But what happens as time goes on, the circle does not disappear. That grief is still there. You actually, grieving is is learning how to carry that, I suppose, relearning the world, but learning how to carry that grief. Why would anyone stop grieving the loss of their loved one? That's not going to happen. But what does happen instead is that life starts to grow around. So you have the black circle, and then you have a bigger circle growing and a bigger circle growing as you start to engage in life, in a new life, a different life. So I think that's a really great way of just simply explaining to someone, because people come with queries sometimes, because I work with people who know they're going to talk about their loss because that's why they're here. So I think some grief education is quite useful. The other one is the dual process model, which means people oscillate between experiencing their grief in all its manifestations, crying, sadness, yearning, all the things that arise when we have lost someone. That's the grief side, if you like. And then there's the restoration side, which it means you have to go to Social Security and sort things out. You have to learn how to cook if you've never cooked for yourself. You have to learn how to go to an event by yourself. These are restoration things. And you oscillate between those two. And you take a rest from the grieving. You are not, if you like, required to be grieving all the time. Give yourself a break and attend to these. So that's how one moves forward, just that oscillation between the two. So I think sometimes it can be helpful to have frameworks. I'm very big on frameworks and models.
I'm going to ask you, we're going to find something to put in the show notes about those for people who want to know more.
Yes.
We'll reference something there. That's very helpful, Ronna. Thank you. Anything else you want to make sure we touch on?
If you want to ask me anything else.
No, I would say this has been very enlightening. Again, another interesting perspective on this. And thank you so much for sharing all these things here. And also, do you have like some other resources or things where people can learn more about what you're doing and offering there?
There's so much more I want to ask you. Yeah, but let's make sure that people know how to get in touch with you as we wrap up the conversation.
Yes. Well, to get in touch with me, it's probably I can give you an email address. I don't have a website because I don't have a
how to get in touch with you, like Whitney said, key resources, anything you want to leave people with in terms of how they can find out more.
There is an American website called What's Your Grief, which is, I think, it's got some quite nice resources I've seen in that I haven't checked recently, but I think it's quite a nice resource. There's lots of literature. If you go into any bookstore or look online, the grief section is huge, and this just tells you that we live in, it's inescapable. But the other thing I would like to say just quickly is that even though grief is universal, most people find a way forward in life over time. Complicated grief, which is in the a DSM, so as a mental health condition, affects a small portion of people. I think we need to remember that, because even though our own griefs and losses can knock us completely flat, I think we need to be reassured that actually life does offer us more than loss. Loss is there, but it's not the only thing. I think that's and I think that's a way of reassuring people. If you do encounter people coming into your space, your therapeutic space, who are grieving and are suffering, that gentle reassurance and validation of the way they are, and reassurance, and just saying that most people find their way through, just to support people. Yeah. There's so much to talk about in this topic, but I don't think I have anything else to say today.
Yeah.
That's a good piece.
There's a good book by a guy called George Bonanno. It's more about trauma, but I think it's he talks about resilience, and I think that's quite a good book. There's lots of really good books out there. I don't have anything specific, unfortunately.
We're going to list what you've said so far, and as I mentioned to you, this is part of a series that I'm interested in doing, where we're going to unfold resources. So don't feel like you have to be comprehensive about it. I mean, you've given us a lot about how grief can show up in our practice room, and ways that we can be with it as practitioners.
Mm-hmm.
Very nice to talk to you both. Thank you.
And do remember, the Thinking Practitioner podcast is supported by ABMP, Associated Bodywork and Massage Professionals. ABMP membership gives professional practitioners like you a package including individual liability insurance, free continuing education, and quick reference apps, online scheduling and payments with Pocket Suite, and much more.
ABMP CE courses, podcast, and Massage and Bodywork magazine always feature expert voices and new perspectives in the profession, like Whitney Lowe, and I write for them as well. Thinking Practitioner listeners can save on joining ABMP at abmp.com/thinking.
And thanks to all of our listeners and to our sponsors. You can stop by our sites for the video, show notes, transcripts, and any extras. You can find that over on my site at academyofclinicalmassage.com. And Till, where can they find that for you?
Well, I like what you've done with your website. I hope people do stop by and see how clear it is these days.
Well, thank you.
My website, advanced-trainings.com. If you have comments, questions, things you'd like us to hear from you about or hear us talk about, just send us an email or record a short voice memo on your phone. Send it to us at info@thethinkingpractitioner.com, or look for us on social media. I'm at my name, Till Luca, and Whitney, where can people find you?
They can also find me on social under my name, Whitney Lowe. And if you will, rate us on Apple Podcasts, as it does help other people find the show. And you can hear us wherever you happen to listen to your podcast player of choice. Please do share the word, tell a friend. And again, Ronna, thank you so much for joining us with our conversation today.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. The pleasure
All right.
to speak to both.
All right.
Thank you.